Okay, good evening. I'm Scott Krieger, immediate past president of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. It is my privilege to welcome you to the third in our series on racism in America, developed by our Community Relations Committee. Tonight's webinar, entitled Understanding Today, is a family conversation with Jews of color. The discussion will focus on issues of racism, anti-Semitism, but most of all, inclusion. Namely, are we as a Jewish community doing enough to recognize the diversity of the Jewish people, and are we being inclusive of Jews who are not just white and Ashkenazi? Are we aware that there are, in fact, Jews of color who live in our greater Metro West area, who daven in our synagogues and send their kids to Jewish day schools and Hebrew schools? We believe that as the nation undergoes a national reckoning about racial inequality, we too must undergo our own reckoning to hear and learn from Jews of color and to make sure they are seen, heard, included, and embraced by all in all of our Jewish spaces. Our thanks to Rabbi Avi Friedman, Senior Rabbi of Or Shalom and Summit, who will moderate tonight's discussion and introduce our distinguished panel. At about 8:15, we will be opening the floor for questions, which we ask you to put either in the chat or Q&A functions of Zoom at the bottom of your screens. There are over 200 people on tonight's webinar, which shows the degree to which this has struck a nerve in our community. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. It is my honor to turn this over to Rabbi Friedman, who will now introduce our panel.
Thank you so much, Scott. So first of all, let me say Mazel Tov to you on attaining the most desired position in all of Jewish communal life, that of immediate past president. And thank you for all you've done for our federation. I am honored to be a part of tonight's conversation on behalf of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. This is the third in a series by our Community Relations Committee exploring racism and what we as Jews can and must do to bring about racial equality and social change. When I became a rabbi a million years ago, I would hear the phrase Black-Jewish relations, and the assumption was that people were talking about how two separate and distinct communities got along together. That assumption, of course, allowed us to ignore the people of color very much present in the Jewish community who have always been a part of the Jewish community. The term Jews of color was first seen in print in 2001, perhaps coined by Shahana McKinney-Baldwin, a Jewish diversity educator. She used it to describe Jews of African, Asian, Latin, and Native American heritage. A 2019 analysis of previous Jewish population studies showed that we have historically undercounted Jews of color, and they actually make up between 12 and 15% of the American Jewish population. The percentage is much higher in Israel, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Not all Jews are white and Ashkenazi. As Scott said, tonight's conversation is a family discussion, giving some members of our family who have not always been heard the opportunity to be heard. The focus of our discussion will be around questions of inclusiveness, whether we as a Jewish community, largely white and Ashkenazi, are doing enough to see, to include, and to embrace Jews with a different skin color as members of our family. And so, to that end, I am delighted to welcome our panel this evening. First, Nolan Edmondson, a native of Montclair and a member of Suburban Torah in Livingston, who converted to Judaism at the age of 18. He's a 2019 graduate of Yeshiva University, where he was elected president of the student body, and he is currently applying to law schools. Nina Essel is a licensed social worker and the mother of 2 Jewish and Black children. She and her family belong to Congregation Beth El in South Orange, She recently authored an excellent piece for Kveller entitled, "Let's Make Jewish Spaces More Welcoming for Black Kids Like Mine." It addresses the need for synagogues to purposefully expand the understanding of who is a Jew and also prioritize the work of social and racial justice. Next, we have Sahai Lukes, who is a rising senior at Montclair High School and a member of Temple Ner Tamid in Bloomfield. Sahai was adopted from Ethiopia as a baby. She has 4 other siblings, including one sister who was also adopted from Ethiopia, and an African-American brother who was born and adopted here in the US. And finally, we welcome Rabbi Isaiah Rothstein, who I believe lives in Harlem now, hails originally from Muncie, and recently joined the professional staff of JFNA, Jewish Federations of North America, as rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor. Upon hiring Rabbi Rothstein, JFNA wrote that a flourishing Jewish community must be welcoming to the differences and diversity of the Jewish people, and Jewish federations themselves must reflect this diversity. So to all of our panelists, I say welcome. And I apologize, one of the downsides to Zoom is that we cannot give you the round of applause that you so deserve, but I hope that you all hear our applause coming to you through the internet. I will start the conversation, but I want to emphasize something that Scott said. Everyone should feel free to ask questions through the Q&A or chat functions. We want to hear from you, and we will try and get as many of your questions into the conversation. So I'd like to start with Rabbi Rothstein, who has just taken on this new position. Rabbi, most of us think of Jews as white and Ashkenazi. And can you talk to us a little bit about the national picture, what our community really looks like, and what are some perhaps exciting things that are going on in this area in Jewish spaces around the country?
Shalom, thank you, Rabbi Friedman, and shalom, friends. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I just want to send blessings to you wherever you might be, and for your family, and for good health. Another thing I'll say, growing up in a mixed race family in Muncie, New York, my parents, an interracial Chabad family, have been married for 40 years, and I would say these conversations weren't happening as I was growing up, and highlighting stories about Jews of color, and again, even as Rabbi Friedman pointed out, that term wasn't used when I was a child. I'm just grateful and honored that we've arrived to a time where we're centering these conversations. You know, Rabbi Friedman, you asked two different questions. I think the first one specifically about the Jewish community and looking at the Jewish community beyond just one racial identity and category. I think we know that Jews are a multiracial and a multi-ethnic and multi-vocal people. If you even Google global Jewry, you'll actually see a Jewish Federations of North America as the first thing on the Google search, and it shows that the federation system, along with the JDC and other organizations, we support Jewish life in over 70 countries. I personally have traveled with the JDC, you know, to Ethiopia and to India, where I've spent Shabbat with Jews in those countries. Not to mention, as you said, Rabbi Friedman, speaking about the multiracial Jewish state of Israel. So thinking about just a little bit, I think, you know, for a mini history lesson's sake, the arc of understanding Jewish American populations, in the year 1700s, I'm not sure if you knew this, there were 200 Jews around in America. And in 1860, there were about 150,000 Jews. And it was really at the turn of the century where we see the population rising to 1 million Jews in the early 1900s. After World War I, over 3 million Jews. After World War II, rising to higher numbers. And why did the American Jewish population grow? In many ways, because it was safe. And God bless America that there was access for the Jewish community in ways unprecedented for Jews. And I think it's important to remember that mobility, that accessibility that the Jewish community was able to have. And I just think it's important to remind ourselves, because America is built upon this false notion of biological racial dominance, how power and race as a tool to acquire power was something that I think the Jewish community, predominantly being a European body in America during this time, really took access from and tried to utilize. So I think there's just something about the overall history of understanding American racial Jewish identity that I think we need to explore more. There's more out there. There's a lot that we could read on just this topic, but understanding how, because of the context of America, what racial identity meant for the Jewish community actually shifted and changed from decade to decade of our time in America. Specifically to the count around Jews of color, thinking about the numbers, the data points, and the inflection points. I want to just say I'm not a demographer in the slightest. I bow to the experts in this work. A shout out to Alana Kaufman from the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative, in many ways being a hub for understanding how to have data-informed strategies for how we best build capacity for Jews of color in the field. What I'll say is when it comes to counting, it's already a bold statement. We need not look far. The Torah, the fourth book of the Torah, speaks to numbers and what happens when we try to count, but we also remember that the book still ends with a second census, recognizing that we need a count. There's something powerful to actually creating visibility. So just on the numbers, I'll just briefly say, when I worked for B'chol Hashon briefly, one of the questions that would come up often, B'chol Hashon has been around for about 20 years, since the year 2000. B'chol Hashon means in every tongue. Their website is globaljews.org. The organization really came alive out of a study conducted by the founders, Gary Tobin and Diane Tobin, basically trying to identify what the numbers were around the racial and ethnic diversity of the Jewish community. And they came up with the number 20%. And through my works, people would sometimes say to me, well, it's not really that number. And obviously, two Jews, three opinions, let alone when it comes to data. And I would say that the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative, what they did is really try to synthesize 25 different community studies, trying to understand the numbers. The fact that B'chol Hashon said 20%, they were identifying 10% as Sephardi and Mizrahi, and 10% as, according to the US Census, of Black, Asian, Latinx. And so I think there's complication already around metrics, the fact that race is fluid, the fact that how we identify, for me, even as a mixed race Jew who looks white, how I personally choose to identify is not necessarily how I am identified by society. So just to say that as much as the data is complicated, one of the questions we should really be asking is to look, and when we look past the data, and with this I'll pause, is, like I said at the very start, as always being a multiracial people, and as for me in my existence, and I won't speak for my colleagues and new friends that I'm sharing this space with, this has been my life. My life has been charged by race. It's not new. And it's true that we're seeing trends, and God bless data to actually remind us of the work that we need to do. But I do have hope in our ability to look past the data and to think more of this belief in unity, not uniformity, but that we could come together. And believing in unity today is like doing spiritual push-ups. So with that, I'll pause.
So thank you. And to get beyond the data, we want to start to hear the stories of our panelists. So I'm going to ask Nina, and then Sahai, and then Nolan, each of you, to share with us something, obviously I gave a brief bio for each of you, but tell us a little bit more about you. So Nina, would you go first?
Yeah. Hi, I'm excited to be here and participate in this really important panel. So like Rabbi Friedman said, I'm a school-based social worker. I'm also a parenting coach. My husband, we met in college. It was a while ago now. We have two beautiful kids who are right now shipped off to my loving parents' house so we can get a break from quarantine, but they are 5 and 2. My husband is from Ghana, which is a country in West Africa. So we are raising Black and Jewish children and trying to connect them not only to Jewish culture, but also to Ghanaian culture and the languages that my husband speaks. So we're really having a lot of conversations about identity and identity formation in our house.
Thank you. Sahai, would you like to tell us something about you that we don't yet know?
Hi, my name is Sahai, and I'm 17 years old. I'm a rising senior at Montclair High School. I've always felt welcomed in the Jewish community. Growing up, my mother always expressed a strong sense of Jewish values. I'd say that she is who I turn to as my Jewish role model. She wanted to pass down these values to her children, and as a child, um, I never really enjoyed things such as going to Hebrew school or even temple in that matter. But as I grew up, I really connected with my Judaism, doing many activities such as going to Jewish sleepaway camp and being in my smaller community, my Havurah. And that's really helped me express my Judaism and connect with it.
Thank you so much. And Nolan, would you tell us something we don't know about you?
Hello, my name is Nolan. My experiences in the Jewish community is one that started when I was
Nolan, I apologize. I'm going to cut you
younger,
off.
and
Your internet connection
12,
is not great.
13, and influenced definitely by.
So Nolan, I'm going to ask you to log out and maybe log back in, and we'll see if we can get a slightly better internet connection for you, because we really want to hear what you have to say. And while we're dealing with that, I'd like to now turn to the three members of our panel. And I guess what I would really like to ask you is, what is it like walking into a typical North American synagogue as either a person of color or as the mother or spouse of someone of color, and maybe the positive stories, the positive experiences you've had, and share with us perhaps negative experiences as well. So we didn't talk about an order to go in here, so if someone wants to jump in, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead, Sahai.
When I walk into my synagogue, I feel a sense of comfort because it is a community that I have grown up in and I know many faces. When I walk into other synagogues, there's a sense of discomfort, such as when I attend my friends' bat and bar mitzvahs, primarily people that don't go to my school. It is more likely than not that I am one of the few people of color, and that can give me a sense of discomfort.
Thank you. And Nina, I know this was a part of what inspired your Feller piece, so maybe you can talk about this experience.
Of course. So I grew up in the synagogue that my father grew up in Rochester, New York, which is also a Bethel. And so that was very important to me. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor who religiously went to services up until well into his 80s, in which going to services was just too difficult. He went every single week. So entering a synagogue when I was growing up definitely felt like home, definitely felt comfortable. I bring a new perspective to it now that I enter the space with my husband and my children, because it's kind of obvious, right? When I enter, people know me, I blend in, I look like I belong there. When I enter now with my husband and my children, you just kind of develop this sense of awareness when you're a person of color, and when you're in close relationship with people of color, you just can tell what people's eyes are doing. And you kind of have this sense of whether or not people are watching or looking at you. And so, we tried a lot of different synagogues in New York when we lived in New York and Brooklyn, and it was always different to see whether people gave you a smile or gave you a friendly signal when you walked in, or did they just kind of look at you and then turn away? Did people walk over and greet you or welcome you into the space, or did people not really make space for you at the table? So we've had mixed experiences. It really just depends on the environment and who's there.
Thank you. So Nolan, I think you're back with us.
Yes.
I would like to give you an opportunity to share and maybe talk a little bit about your experience at YU and anything else that you want to talk about.
Certainly. Well, I've paused video just so that hopefully the audio can come out. The video is not so important. get on my face. Yeah, so my experience in Jewish communities has, it's certainly been a peculiar one. I think going to shuls as a child that was not Jewish, but was sort of enamored with Judaism, there was a big part of me that was, and I think still is, pretty oblivious. Oblivious to sort of other people's glances, oblivious to sort of certain social situations, not all. And I think that really did, that was a credit to me going to shuls, right? Because I was really able to focus on the experience of davening and the experience of being in Jewish communion without ever having to worry about those sort of looks and stares. However, I think as I got older and sort of exposed myself to different Jewish communities around the country, certainly I'm met with a bit of like Nina said, some of those stares or questions. And I think, for me, one of the things that really always, like, I say it doesn't really bother me, but it does sort of like irk me a little bit, is people who come up to me very just sort of like unprovoked or, without having known anything else about me. And the first question is like, so like, you a convert? And, yeah, I'm proud of, I can claim that. I'm very proud to be a convert to Judaism. But I think, beyond just being, converts, at least in Jewish history, have always been seen as strangers for whom we welcome into the fold. And, there are different, halacha and Jewish practices of not excluding the convert, right? And I found, I guess, throughout my experience that, even bringing up my my former religious background and my conversion background always sort of fills me with a feeling of otherness that I think I have tried for quite some time, to craft or to sort of put behind me and not really make it part of my identity. So yeah, I hope that sort of gives a little bit of background. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So will you also talk a little bit about your experience at YU and becoming president of the student body and what your experiences were like there?
Sure. And so I think at YU and in certain Orthodox circles, right, because I was so very, I think, comfortable in my Jewish practice and I guess around other, Jewish people, especially like around other Orthodox people, as I had been for years, I really do feel like I sort of just like fell into YU sort of, I guess head first and it seemed as though my experience there was very much, I don't think I necessarily could have like really become president had there been any sort of like feelings of either animosity or discomfort about me being Black and in that Jewish space. At the same time, it is still a school that that takes from different parts of the Jewish community and mainly the Orthodox community, and the Orthodox community obviously being one in which there are very few Jews of color, right? So like, in normal, everyday interactions with students, right? I sort of, I guess, sort of, I braced myself, I guess, to kind of, expect a one-off ignorant comment about race, or I braced myself in some respects to expect a comment about, if not necessarily about my race, about like, social situations going on in America, right? And I think there was an expectation that because I fell among the ranks of Orthodox Jews, then I must agree, outright with what they're saying, or that I must not, that they weren't talking about me when they were talking about those experiences, those national social experiences that plenty of Black folk in the country were talking about. They were talking, I'm different. I've literally heard people say like, oh, no, you're not Black. like, you know, or sort of that implication that, right, you are a little bit somehow, I guess, less than Black because you also associate with this Jewishness.
Yeah,
So,
I
you know,
do
it's
want to
been a
come
very
back to that
experience.
issue with all of our panelists about, you know, perceptions from perhaps the African American community as well as from the Jewish community. But before we do that, I want to give Rabbi Rothstein an opportunity from your unique perspective, both as a Jew of color, but also as a rabbi, right? So you kind of see this from a few different perspectives. You check some different boxes. So jump in here and you know, what can you tell us about your experiences?
Yeah, thank you. I think also this is a really important, question, really thinking about experiences in the Jewish community as a whole, as Jews of color. I'll say that, my experience, I'll speak for myself, but one of the things that I think about growing up in a mixed race family while passing for white, I didn't grow up with a white experience. I grew up undercover in a way because my identity on the inside did not reflect what was on the outside. So in many ways, I had a front row seat to many different kinds of experiences, not to mention the difference between going to shul or being in spaces with different members of my family and the experiences I would have that way of actually noticing the reactions of my communities or the communities in which I would be a part of, and how that would ultimately would resonate differently for me based on which family member I was even with, because of seeing sometimes the inability for people to see that we're actually siblings, or that that's my mother. And so I think that there's things that have come up in that way. And when it comes to like creating a sense of visibility for these issues as a rabbi, I mean, one of the things I would very often, my heart would skip and jump when I would see mixed race Jews coming to the synagogue spaces in which I've worked. Nina, like describing your family, that's just something that my heart would always warm. And I worked in a synagogue for a few years, and there were actually several congregants that did have that had either they were interracial couples or having their own experiences and their children. And as an educator, working as a rabbi K through 12th grade, there definitely was a different conversation I would engage with those students that I would have. And congregants. And I think that ultimately the note of rabbis in the 21st century and what we know in cultural competence and how we are able to create a community environment that truly supports each of us from where we're at, I think is some of the magic that we're hoping to see more of in this generation.
Thank you. So I want to eventually get to all of our panelists, but I want to start with you, Sahai, talking perhaps a little bit about the response of some of your friends who don't know you're Jewish when they find out you're Jewish, and what that's been like for you in a public high school, and then maybe contrast that with your experience at Jewish sleepaway camp, the flip side, how you feel among Jewish friends as perhaps one of the few Jews of color at your camp.
So, so at my Jewish summer camp, I always felt a sense of community, and I always felt like accepted in a sense, because I was always one of two campers of color. And at camp I've met some of the most amazing people, and I've always been greeted with such a welcoming community. As I got older, I did realize that the importance of having more people grow up around you that look like you is beneficial and super important to being a member of society. And that is something that I really felt that I didn't have at camp. My family has been a part of a Havara, which is a social group of like-minded people having a Jewish cultural experience without a strong focal point on religion. We've become like family within this community, and There are other Jews of color that are in our Havurah, and that has been a great sense of family for me. An experience I've had with anti-Semitism within the community at my school is when a student created an anonymous Twitter account to expose, for say, the hypocritical and racist actions of students within my school. This student was a Black woman. She had posted a photo that she deemed as hypocritical because she felt that it was a white woman centralizing herself in the conversation of racial inequalities. The post she deemed as hypocritical was a post that my friend wrote on her Instagram account, which she posted to educate people on proper social distancing and advocate for it because it affects primarily communities of color disproportionately. I went on to defend my friend because what she had posted was clear allyship. The person running the account told me that I shouldn't be defending my friend. And out of the blue, she said to me, "Don't you have some imperialism to defend?" I was taken back by this because I'm very vocal online about my pro-Israel and my pro-Palestinian views. So the person clearly knew that who I was and used my Judaism and values to further her agenda when the conversation had nothing to do with her premise.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. That's a difficult spot to find yourself in at any age. I want to come back to you, Nina. And one of the things that you have focused on is how to make your synagogue a more welcoming space for your family, and in particular your kids, but really for your whole family. And what are some things that have been helpful, and what are some steps that you would like to see your synagogue to take in the future, and that perhaps other synagogues could learn from based on your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just so important to recognize the history and culture and perspective of Jews of color, recognize that Jews of color have existed for the entire history of Judaism, right? It's not a new thing or only a converted thing. I know when my parents traveled to China several years ago, they visited synagogues. There's synagogues in Argentina. Like, Jews have existed all over the world. But I think, like with many other things, history gets whitewashed. I am an Ashkenazic Jew. That is what I learned in Hebrew school, and I didn't really learn about other Jewish communities until I was much older. And I think that we need to start that education earlier, and not only have conversations about Jews of color in regards to race and racism. I think viewing Blackness or viewing people of color solely through the lens of oppression, like, just perpetuate some of the issues. I would love to see when we have a conversation about how you celebrate Rosh Hashanah, we have Jews of color. When we're planning an event, you have Jews of color. Like, it doesn't always have to just be about race and racism, involving Jewish voices, Jewish stories, and Jewish histories in a variety of things. And I think one of the things that I'm reminded of, there's a quote that says, "The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist." And I think that that's exactly true about race and racism. As white people, we are conditioned and racialized to believe that racism doesn't exist, to not identify as white as a race, right? White is neutral. And so I think one of the biggest things is also for white Jews to do a lot of exploration and development of their own racial identity so that they can be better participants in these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to remind everybody that out there that you can submit questions through the chat or through the Q&A function. And one of the questions that did come in was for you, Nolan, and it was about the Hebrew name that you took when you chose to become Jewish. And could you answer that for everybody? I know you answered it in a small circle, but more people want to hear what you have to say.
Sure. So Hebrew name is Noam Akiva. The Noam was chosen because, you know, it has sort of similarities to Nolan. It's Nolan, Noam, and Akiva because Rabbi Akiva, you know, the great scholar who only began learning Torah much later in life. And to me, as like a teenager who felt as I kind of missed out a bit on some formative Jewish experiences and years. Really resonated, that name really resonated with me. You know, if he could do it at, I think tradition says he was age 40, then perhaps I could also do it, you know, at age 18. So.
Well, Rabbi Akiva, of course, turned out all right, and you're doing pretty well too, Nolan. So good choice, good choice. So I want to come back to moments of tension between the Black community and the Jewish community. There's a whole lot of great history with the Black community and the Jewish community, but there have also been some moments of tension. And I wonder if any of you can speak to ever sort of feeling that tension personally, whether it's one community or the other demanding that you forsake your Jewishness or your Blackness in order to, you know, be authentic. So I don't know who wants to go first. Nolan, looks like you're nodding your head, so I don't know if you have something to say on this one too.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think coming from, right, a Black family and having, you know, relatives of all sort of stripes and colors, and also being in a largely, you know, Jewish community, that tension is felt all the time. Right? Like, it's felt when, you know, when Black family members of mine sort of make not so subtle, like, anti-Semitic comments, or comments that very, you know, easily could come from like an anti-Semitic place, and I don't often think that they do, but like, you know, they touch on a lot of stereotypes about Jews, right? And so they not necessarily they associate me with it, but they wonder why I associate with Jews if that is, you know, a fact of Jews, right? And you know, having to kind of explain, like, no, that's really not the case, or with regards to Israel, as Sahai said, right? You know, and also I think on the flip side, right, having a lot of Jews who especially Orthodox Jews, and especially older Orthodox Jews, who may, you know, have criticisms about the Black Lives Matter movement's stance on Israel, which is, you know, I think a legitimate, like, criticism of a tenet of the movement, right? But it may not necessitate a wholesale rejection of, at the very least, the goals and the aims of part of the movement. And I think that's a tough thing for anyone to, you know, to sort of reconcile. So that tension is certainly felt.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sahai?
In the presence of media, I love when Black celebrities want to advocate and uplift the Black community. However, there is a consistent argument that in order to uplift a community, many people put down another in order to do so. And an expression popularized by JFK is, the rising tide lifts all boats. And I believe that minorities should be working together and not against each other.
Thank you, Sahai. Rabbi Rothstein, I want to turn to you. Maybe you can talk about this from a little bit more of an institutional perspective. You know, in particular, there was an issue recently in Philadelphia with the NAACP, with the local leader there. And then, you know, there's been some back and forth between Jewish organizations and African-American organizations trying to work through the difficulty. So what would you say about this particular issue?
Thank you. Yes, Sahai, that last line, thank you so much. So inspiring, so strong. Really appreciate it. And again, this conversation. I think for me, just like when it comes to, let's say, BDS, Black Lives Matter, Nation of Islam, what people are calling Black anti-Semitism, in many ways, just peeling away a few layers for a second to remind ourselves that when we frame these issues without nuance, we actually do a disservice greatly to the sake of moving the needle for racial equity, social equity as a whole. And that ultimately, I think that a part of our job, just how we know that Jews are not a monolith, right? The Black community is also not a monolith. And in many ways, we are different people, different voices, different experiences, different reflections. Personally, I'll also share that my background, my first cousins are Black Muslims. I've known about Louis Farrakhan since I was literally in middle school. So I just want to remind people, like, again, new ideas. And again, I think Nolan was starting to say this too. In Hasidic terminology, it's called klipat noga, when there's both the good and the bad and the ugly and everything in between, and it's muddled. And a lot of our work, I think, is really to peel back the layers and to define and to create some more nuance and texture. And then there's like just this real question of our relationships, authentic, real relationships, starting from a place that's not necessarily reactive, but that's proactive. And recognizing that nuance does come into place when we've made a choice to really engage in the grayness, in the muddled nature of this work, and to do so thoughtfully, tread carefully, and recognizing our own humility, our own perspectives. That's just a little bit of thoughts on this particular issue.
Thank you. So we did get a question from one of our attendees who says she's noticed when white Jews tend to start a conversation with Jews of color, they often say something like, what's your Jewish story? Or, tell me how you got here, kind of thing. Something that probably they wouldn't say to someone who presents as a white Ashkenazi Jew. So Nina, do you want to maybe take a stab at this? Has your family been on the receiving end of some of this stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my husband's pretty well known in both of our synagogues, but I do think that a lot of times we meet people, and I mean, this is a very American thing too. We always ask, like, what do you do for work? It's like one of the first questions, instead of like, how are you? What are you up to today? And like just connecting on a human level. And I think while it sometimes comes from like genuine curiosity and just trying to find a place to connect, it can also be felt as like you're questioning if I belong, you're looking for my credentials, you're looking for my resume. And so I think sometimes it's better to just try to have a genuine conversation without diving into all the checking the boxes or trying to fit someone in the box, right? Like a lot of times you'll have somebody who is racially ambiguous and people are like, what are you? What's your, like, where are you from? No, like, where are you from? And it's just like, let's just connect and talk. You don't have to like know which box I check in order to have a human connection, and then allow the person to kind of share their own story in a way that's comfortable for them.
And I mean, I'll simply say, I think people just need to stop being surprised at seeing families that look different, right? And people who look different, because that's really
Absolutely.
what that question is expressing. And hopefully if we continue having these kinds of conversations and also including people the way that you said before in all of our conversations, that sense of surprise will diminish. At least we can hope so. Nolan, it seems almost unfair to ask you this question after I've just said that, but I hope now that we've gotten to know you a little bit, you can tell us a little bit about what drew you to Judaism. So this is not to say, what are you doing here or do you belong here? But I do think that having you on this panel is so that we can hear your story. So please tell us your story.
So I think what really drew me to Judaism early on, and I say this as someone who now is Jewish, and I often say this to other people as well, what continues to draw me back to Judaism, and I think we as Jews can continue to be drawn back, every day, is this real desire to want to know and to want to learn and to question and to, inquire into certain things, and, never to totally accept a situation or whatever it might be at face value. And I think coming from pretty devoutly Christian background, I always felt a bit of uncertainty, I guess, about whether or not certain questions were able to be asked, or whether how far up a ladder of serious inquiry I might be able to go before getting an answer to a question. And I think, you know, at least in my experience with Judaism early on and even now, what really drew me first to Judaism was not so much that the answer was there, but that very much the question was encouraged. Right? And you know, whether it be on a matter of like halacha or it be on a matter of you know of race in this country and how our nation engages with race, I think it is quite a testament to, you know, to at least our community in the greater Metro West area, that like we as Jews are sort of, you know, hunkering down and trying to ask questions so as to get a greater and better understanding. And, you know, while that originally for me was like, you know, was more geared towards like asking religious sort of, you know, philosophical questions, you know, the ikar is still there, that asking the questions is really what sort of moves you along, right, in some form of progress.
Thank you. Thank you. So as I was thinking about this conversation, I was thinking about one of the last times when there was a real seismic shift in Judaism, and that was the change in women's status. And some of the first women rabbis and cantors said that one of the challenges for them was the lack of role models, right? There had never been women rabbis and cantors before. So, so I want to put that out to you. I mean, so first of all, you are all being role models to us this evening, and I applaud you for that. But who are your role models when it comes to Jews of color? And who are some of the people that we should perhaps know about as a part of this conversation? So I don't know who would like to go first. Rabbi, are you going to take a shot? You're muted.
Yes, thank you. I mean, listen, number one, this moment in time, I think in many ways we are seeing, we're seeing certain, there's an address for Jews of color in many ways that hasn't been before. There's visibility. I would say the first, I was working in a school setting until 2015, 2016, and I was invited to a gathering of Jews of color that turned into the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative. And in many ways, the work of the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative is to enable Jews of color to thrive and to succeed in the broader Jewish community, and to create capacity for us to feel like we have access points, and as well as visibility and community. So I think that there's a new edge that's particularly taking place, not to mention the last few months that I think we've seen a particular awakening in the Jewish community of reckoning with our identities and our relationships to living in a racially charged society. You know, as a mixed race Jew who passes for white, I see my role in many ways as someone who is a conduit to lift up others in this space and in our space together. And a lot of the work that I'm doing regularly now is actually working to create that pipeline. That's some of the work I'm doing at Jewish Federations of North America. Honestly, from our youngest members of our community, as Nina has been sharing with us, to my parents and my friends' parents and grandparents, and I'm like thinking about how we actually are threading together what community integration looks like, and how we see each other in community to a place where it's normative. And the last thing I'll share is one of the definitions of equity, in addition to it being a verb, it's something that we practice. One of them is that it's where suddenly it becomes normative, where we're no longer saying, oh, where are you from? And how did you get here? And, oh, you're a Jew of color, and how did you end up becoming an Orthodox rabbi? Or tell me about your like, where suddenly it's seen as normal. And I know it seems like we're a far way away, but there is an action plan, hopefully, that we could create to getting there. And I do feel hopeful. I do. I see more and more people stepping into leadership positions that look more like my siblings and my mother than I have seen in all my life.
Well, I definitely think we in Greater Metro West are excited to partner with you and see what you bring in your new position for JFNA and what you can bring to our community in this process. I'd like to just turn to our other three panelists and ask the three of you, what can we be doing better? What would you like to see for you going forward, for the next generation? What can we be doing better? Okay, Sahai, go first.
I think in order to do better, we need to not only educate this generation, but also educate the coming generations. Such as when I was in Hebrew school, which I still am, I never really learned about Black Jewish role models or really any other people of color. And I was the only student of color in my Hebrew class. And I think that did affect me in a sense that, hey, like, I don't have a Jewish role model, which is a community of mine that I can look to.
Thank you, Sahai. Nina, it looked like you were going to try and get in also.
Yeah. So I think it's so important for this work to start internally. It's way too easy to like go to a Jewish film festival, watch a movie, read a book, and then not apply it to ourselves. And I'm just also reminded of this quote that it's a privilege to be able to learn about racism rather than experience it. And so no, I know right now today on the panel, several of us are sharing our experiences with racism. So that people can learn about it. And I think I just want people to recognize that being able to learn about it and not have to face it every day when you leave your house is a privilege. And you cannot engage in this journey passively. You have to do the deep, uncomfortable, and messy work of reflecting on what is my racial identity, how do I fit in the system, and recognize that color blindness is not helpful. Right? A lot of people will say like, oh, I love you no matter if you're black, blue, purple, green. That is actually something that perpetuates racism. It's not something that addresses racism. So we have to be able to be aware of it in order to address it. We have to be aware of it in ourselves and how it operates within us in order for us to participate in a more inclusive community.
Thank you, Nina. Nolan, you want to address that too? What you'd like to see going forward?
Yeah, sure. I think, I don't know, I suppose in the same way that, in the same advice that I would give to those of my white friends who have, I guess, reached out to me during this period of time, which, full disclosure, has been a very strange phenomenon, just like having people reach out and like, ask if I'm okay, sort of assuming that maybe I wouldn't be, which, is nice nevertheless. I just think, when it comes to our interactions with people in our community, both Jewishly and globally, or sort of, that we just sort of really have to, I don't know, just approach people with the same degree of normalcy that you would really anybody else, right? Just they are another person who shares a space with you. You don't have to be hypersensitive simply because they are Black and in your community. I can at least speak from my experience. I would much rather not the hypersensitivity, but it doesn't mean that you have to be a jerk either. But I don't think most people would be, right? Just approach anyone as a normal person, right? And sort of join in this journey together. I think also I've said in the past that branching outside of our own Jewish communities, right, to not only see Jews of color within our communities, but to experience other people of color, other religions other than Judaism, just sort of really getting a much wider understanding of the community around you can and very much will go a long way, I think, in educating, in normalizing, in sort of and it's just sort of making a space where everyone feels comfortable, and more than feels comfortable, making a space where everyone truly is comfortably accepted. So,
well, thank you. I think everyone touched on the idea of education, right? Of learning more about this, and also self-reflection. And I think that those of us who are in positions of leadership in Jewish institutions really need to engage in this process. How do we treat the people who, God willing, one day, once again, will walk through our doors when this lockdown is over? What do our curricula look like in our educational institutions? What does the artwork on our walls look like? And lots of questions that we have not asked ourselves that we need to start asking ourselves in order to change the way it feels for Jews of color to walk through our doors. This is not an exhaustive list, but for those of you who chose to be here tonight, this is obviously an issue that's important to you. And there are organizations that you can turn to learn more. There's the Jews of Color Initiative, there's Dimensions, there's the Jewish Multiracial Network, there's Bechol Lashon, which we heard about earlier, the Global Jews, and there's Ayecha, a community for non-white Jews. I don't know, Rabbi Rothstein, do you want to name any other resources that people should be aware of?
Yes, on one foot, I would say that when I think there are multiple organizations that are under the umbrella SHINE. SHINE is a collective of Jews of color organizations, and there actually might be other organizations that might exist. Another thing I'll share just in the chat is through Jewish Federations of North America, as we continue to have these conversations, we touched today a little bit on Jewish racial identity. How are Jews white? Are Jews white? And there will be a panel. There's a conversation with Dr. Eric Goldstein, L. Goldstein, who wrote this book, The Price of Whiteness, which is around Jews, race, and American identity. And I just would share that with you as a potential next conversation to join in.
So I've been asked to rename all the organizations that I was talking about. So I just put it in the chat. So here are a few websites that you can look at. Linda has pointed out that we will, of course, follow up and make some of these resources available to all of you who've chosen to participate. So now I'm going to send it back to Scott Krieger, who's going to wrap up this conversation. Let me just say thank you to our panelists for your candor and just for being willing to be a part of this conversation this evening and getting the ball rolling. Scott, back to you.
Screen and they suddenly went boop. Bear with me for 20 seconds, everybody, please.
See, if we had another event, we'd have Bruce Springsteen for our transitions, but obviously he wasn't available this evening.
Thank you. There it goes again. Every time this comes on later. Keeps disappearing. I had it. You may want to mention another musician, Rabbi. Why that happened twice? God. Okay. Bear with me. I'm sorry about this, everybody. The story is here. Okay, here we go. Let's try it again. I want to say thank you to our wonderful panel and to Rabbi Friedman for a great job moderating tonight's discussion. You know, the way I look at it is we're all Jews. We share a beautiful heritage, and all of us in our own way, in our own backgrounds, bring our own uniqueness to being part of that collective Jewish world. And I think we need, and we'll, God willing, get past the point where we say, oh, you're an Italian Jew, you're Russian, you're European, you're from the States, Africa, Asia, whatever the case may be. And we can share, you know, we can share our heritage, each to his or her own. It's just a natural discourse. But I don't think it's part of what's out there first and foremost. We're all Jews, and we all share, and we're all in whatever our endeavors are, we are in them and do them together. This was the third in a series of events to educate our community on the issue of systemic racism in America. Our Jewish Federation's response will include an action plan that goes beyond these educational webinars. Both Leslie Dan and Rosenthal, who was on the call tonight, and myself, two past presidents of our Jewish Federation, are chairing this effort, which will include ways for our community to get involved and make a difference. Our professionals are working collaboratively across departmental lines to make the issue of social justice, civil rights, and repairing the world something that's present and ongoing. So please stay tuned for the date of our fourth webinar, which will be called Making a Difference, and check our website, which is at www.jfedgmw.org for a list of all our amazing programs this summer. On behalf of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West, thank you again for joining us, one and all. Be well, be safe, and good night to all.